Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. Well, here we are, the other side of Thanksgiving. Hope you had an absolutely fantastic, holiday, Thanksgiving holiday. Gathered around with family and what have you. My son came home and we had a great visit, had a really, really good time. Haven't been able to do that in a good long time. And so it was very, very good. And we had enough food to probably feed 8 or 10 people. But hey, really, really enjoyed the time. And I hope that you and your family likewise enjoyed the holiday. So I want to get right back into our study of the parable of the absent master. Now, I've spent a good bit of time on this, and it's necessary to do so in order to understand the totality of the framework and the context of Matthew 25:14 and following. Now, we've sort of kind of segued from that to Acts chapter 1. My argument is that the return of the absent master in Matthew 25:14 and following is the return of Christ promised in Acts chapter 1, 9-11, where as Jesus ascends into the heaven, the apostles are looking up, watching him go, watching him disappear out of their sight, and an angel appeared and said, "You men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing into the heavens? This same Jesus who is taken from you shall come in like manner as you have seen him go." Well, they saw him go out of sight. Just think about that a little bit. But anyway, what I've suggested to you is that this vision of Jesus' ascension is really and truly the fulfillment of Psalms 110. And by the way, I've read for you some scholarship that agrees fully with that. But nonetheless, we are told that Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14 foretold the ascension and therefore the return. But you see, that's problematic. Now, make no mistake, I used to believe that Daniel 7, 13 and 14 predicted the ascension of Christ. I well understand the similarities that are there. The problem is, Daniel 7, as I have pointed out before, Daniel 7, 13 and 14 is set firmly, squarely, and undeniably in a context of judgment, and specifically the judgment of the little horn, the persecutor of God's saints. As I have said before, if you follow the chronological flow, the narrative of Daniel chapter 7, that is absolutely inescapable. You have to take the position, as some do, that Daniel 7, 13 and 14 is a parenthetical insertion into the narrative of Daniel chapter 7 in order to avoid that conclusion that verse 13 and 14 is a judgment context. Now, I've shared with you the fact that in the ancient Masoretic text, the ancient rabbis designated a break in subject by inserting and by observing what they called Parsha Setuma and Partial Patuka. Setuma was a minor break. Patuka was a major break. Well, guess what? They indicated a break at verse 14. They did not indicate a break at verse 13. Now, as I pointed out, this is not definitive. It's not absolutely conclusive. But it certainly gives us insight. And listen, I really don't think that we ought to fall into the trap of saying, well, the ancient rabbis rejected Jesus, therefore they can't say anything true. No. Folks, that's not good hermeneutic. We have to take what they say and balance it, consider it, look at it within context, look at it within the testimony of Scripture, because I can tell you an awful lot of what the ancient rabbis said was absolutely true. I mean, after all, they did believe in the coming of the Messiah. Did they reject Jesus as the Messiah? Yes. Does that mean that their belief in a coming a Messiah was wrong? Well, obviously not. So it's illogical for us to take the position, oh, well, the rabbis were a bunch of unbelievers, therefore we can't accept anything they say. So, what I mentioned to you over the last couple of videos was, what I want to do is to examine how the New Testament writers applied Daniel 7, 13 and 14. And let me say this as an introductory thought. Not one New Testament writer appeals to Daniel 7, 13 and 14 and applies it to the ascension. Not one. I quoted for you one scholar who took note of how Jesus himself used the term Son of Man. He used it of his incarnation. He used it of his crucifixion. And he used it of his coming in judgment. Not one time did Jesus apply Daniel 7 to his impending ascension. When Jesus spoke of the coming of the Son of Man, using that terminology and phraseology, it was invariably in reference to his coming in judgment of Old Covenant Israel. Now, since the New Testament writers tell us that they, through the Spirit, were giving the true, proper, and accurate interpretation of the Old Testament prophecies, then that means that since they never ever apply Daniel 7, 13 and 14 to the ascension of Christ, but that they invariably apply it to his coming in judgment, that means that you and I have no right to apply it to the ascension. Let's see if we can vindicate this claim by examining some, not every one, but a good number of the New Testament texts that mention, in which Jesus himself uses the terminology of the coming of the Son of Man, the context in which he uses the terminology of the Son of Man. One of the very first is to be found in Matthew chapter 10, when Jesus sends his apostles out and tells them to preach the gospel to Israel. But he warns them, you will be hated of all men for my name's sake, and they will persecute you. They will chase you from city to city. But I want you to notice what he told them in Matthew chapter 10. I'm going to begin reading with the verse 21 so that we can see the real context of verse 23. Now, brother will deliver up brother to death, a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. Folks, that's talking about persecution as they go and preach the gospel, right? Which, by the way, never happened in what we call the limited commission. It only happened after Pentecost or after the ascension, as they went and preached in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. So here we have a prediction of persecution for preaching the gospel. You will be hated of all men for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. Now watch this. When they persecute you in this city, flee to another. You will not have gone through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Now, some commentators mistakenly say, well, we got a problem here. Jesus said, you go preach. You will not finish preaching in the cities of Israel until the Son of Man becomes. And yet Jesus said, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to the nations. Then comes the end. So the view of some commentators that Jesus is saying, you won't even finish your task of preaching in all the world before I come. Oh, but wait, you will preach in all the world and then the end will come. Oh, we've got a contradiction in Scripture. No, we do not have a contradiction in Scripture. What we have here is a misunderstanding and misapplication of Jesus' words. Ladies and gentlemen, the context is unequivocally persecution. Brother will deliver up brother. Fathers deliver up children. Children deliver up fathers. You will be hated by all men for my name's sake. When they persecute you in this city, flee to another. And you will not have gone through the cities of Jerusalem until the Son of Man becomes. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, it would be as a result of their preaching in all of the cities of Israel that they would be persecuted. It doesn't say they would not ever finish their task of preaching in all the cities. The issue is persecution and flight from persecution after they have preached throughout all the cities of Israel. But you see, here's the key. In fleeing from that persecution, they would go from one city to another. Do you see a train coming? In fleeing from persecution, Jesus said, you will not have fled through all of the cities, fleeing from persecution before the Son of Man comes. Now, what Jesus is offering them, what Jesus is promising them here, is vindication and relief from the coming persecution. And remember, this persecution did not begin until after the Ascension, until after Pentecost. Matter of fact, we don't find a persecution beginning even in Jerusalem until Acts chapter 8. We have the stoning of Stephen, to be certain, in Acts 6 and Acts chapter 7. But at the stoning of Stephen, a great persecution arose against the church in Jerusalem, so much so that all of the disciples, all the believers fled from Jerusalem except the apostles. And then they fled everywhere. Where did they go? Oh, throughout the cities of Israel and Samaria and to the uttermost parts of the world. Now, what we have here is the promise of the coming of the Son of Man in vindication of their suffering, in relief from that persecution. When did Jesus say that his apostles and prophets, even in their flight from persecution, would be vindicated? Well, in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus, standing in the temple, told the Jews they had killed all of the prophets. They were going to fill up the measure of their sin, of their father's guilt, by persecuting his personal apostles and prophets, and all of those things would come upon that generation as he lamented, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets. Oh, and his apostles and prophets. How often I would have gathered you together under my wings as a mother hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you will not. Behold, your house is left to you desolate. Jesus was promising the vindication of all of the blood, of all of the righteous, by the way, all the way back to Abel. And you know, I find it absolutely remarkable that those who deny covenant eschatology say, well, that just simply couldn't be true. How could the blood of Abel be vindicated in the fall of Jerusalem? Well, you know, even if I would not have an in-depth explanation of that, here's what I've got. I've got Jesus' statement that that was true. So it's absolutely amazing to me that scoffers want to say, oh, it's ridiculous to say that the blood of Abel was vindicated in the fall of Jerusalem. Why is it ridiculous if that's what, not if, since that's what Jesus said? Back to the point. Jesus said his coming as the Son of Man in vindication of the suffering of his apostles and prophets, of his disciples, would be in the lifetime of the first century generation. You, not a future generation, you will not have gone, i.e. fled throughout the city of Jerusalem until the Son of Man is come. Here is a coming of the Son of Man in judgment and vindication. He was not saying, you know what, you will not have fled through all the cities of Jerusalem fleeing from persecution until I ascend. That's ridiculous. He would be coming in vindication of their suffering and judgment of their persecutors. And of course, we got a whole lot more. So I'll see you on the flip side.